Is from Dorothy. One of the greatest evils of the day among those outside the proximity of the suffering poor is their sense of futility. Young people say, "What good can one person do? What is the sense of our small effort?" They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. We can be responsible only for the action of the present moment. But we can beg for an increase of love in our hearts that will vitalize and transform all our individual actions, and know that God will take them and multiply them as Jesus multiplied the loaves and fishes. The greatest challenge of the day is how to bring about a revolution of the heart, a revolution which has to start with each one of us. When we begin to take the lowest place, to wash the feet of others, to love our brothers with that burning love, that passion which led to the cross, then we can truly say, "Now I have begun." Now is the time in our service when we take an offering. We know it is the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and gather. For all attending in person, we'll pass the collection plate. If your offering is part of your pledge or is a donation, please use the envelope you'll find in the pew. Include your name so we can properly record that. For those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate through the PayPal giving page on our website. Please give as generously as you can. Our offerings will be gratefully received.
Please now look within your bulletin. You should find a long sheet of paper. And we'll sing the side with words on it. You don't have to make up your own. Labeled offertory hymn, Keep Woman in Her Sphere. It's sung to the tune of Old Lang Syne. So go right, guys. Sing along.
Kristi Pfister is a painter, public artist, and lifelong New Yorker. Her work focuses on concepts around transparency, translucency, and layering. Recent series include architecture and its evolution from the sacred to the secular, and Dorothy Day as a temporary caryatid leading a procession of activism. Pfister's works have been shown in museums, galleries, universities, and public spaces throughout New York City and the region. She holds a BA in visual art from Barnard College, Columbia University, and received her master's degree from Pratt Institute. Pfister's public artwork includes murals and mosaics funded through the Percent for Art program, the MTA's Arts and Design program, and the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. Pfister is a strong advocate for arts education with an extensive career teaching art at all levels, from early childhood through college. She has worked as a teaching artist with numerous arts organizations and cultural institutions throughout New York City. And now we hear from Kristi Pfister about the work of Dorothy Day, An Artist's View.
A pulpit. Well, thank you, Mary, for this introduction, and a lot. I think you've already gotten kind of a flavor of Dorothy for this talk, but I'll start by saying we all have our own paths to Dorothy Day. Mine came through social action, through my mural work. I'm part of a muralist collective called Art Makers, and in 2005, 20 years ago, I was one of 13 lead artists who painted a 3-story mural on the corner of Nostrand Avenue and Green Street in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, and it was called When Women Pursue Justice. The mural is in the form of a protest, and it's still up. The mural is in the form of a protest with Shirley Chisholm, as it was her congressional district, leading the charge. Included in the mural design were 13 notable women, such as Angela Davis, Emma Goldman, Margaret Sanger, Wilma Mankiller, Audre Lorde, as well as Dorothy Day. I chose to paint Dorothy Day as I lived on Staten Island, had known about the community fight to save her cottage at Spanish Camp, and even had a slight personal connection, which my husband shared with you earlier, about her coming to their home in St. Louis. So I painted Dorothy in the form of a protest sign with her crown of braided hair, which you can kind of see down there, a yellow sun rising behind her, surrounded by the waters of the eastern shore of Staten Island. The border of the poster design was loaves and fishes. Other artwork of mine focuses on architectural sites and ancient ruins, exploring what's dug up and revealed from below, what remains, and through a feminist lens, caryatids. Caryatids are sculpted columns in the form of draped female figures. Notable are the 6 carved into the Erechtheion on the Acropolis in Athens, known as the Porch of the Maidens. These caryatids are part of a religious procession and convey honor to their goddess Athena. Stoic, balanced, powerful with their thick braids, they are not burdened by the weight of the entablature above them. Instead, they bear up and boldly proceed through space together, symbolizing collective strength and religious ritual. I view Dorothy as a modern-day devotional caryatid, leading a procession of activism in service of her God. Dorothy has become a muse of mine, of sorts, and I've had exhibitions with her as the conceptual centerpiece. Through this work, I've met many people who have an interest in her life and cause, and currently serve on the advisory committee of the Dorothy Day Guild, whose mission is to support her canonization in the Catholic Church and to raise awareness of her life, writings, and witness to the gospel. So I'll just, for some of you, you know some about Dorothy, but I'll give you a little bit more background. She was a 20th century radical activist, a journalist, writer, lifelong pacifist, and a practicing Catholic. She's a global icon for social justice and a local icon of New York City, and in particular, Staten Island. In her 1952 autobiography, The Long Loneliness, Dorothy asked, "Where were the saints to try to change the social order?" In response, she co-founded The Catholic Worker, a newspaper and movement that fought for workers' rights and applied Christian tenets of mercy for the poor. She was born in 1897 and spent the first 7 years of her life in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, playing along the water's edge. There's a lot of water going on here. And interestingly, looking across Gravesend Bay at Staten Island. She wrote, "I can remember well the happy hours on the beach with my brothers and fishing in the creek for eels and playing around Fort Hamilton." Her father, John Day, was a journalist, which she would become. He was a sports columnist. Chasing work, the family moved to Oakland, California when Dorothy was 7. She experienced the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 as an 8-year-old and witnessed her first acts of mercy. And I believe this had a profound influence that shaped her future self. She wrote, "The flames and cloud bank of smoke could be seen across the bay, and all the next day the refugees poured over by ferry and boat. All the neighbors joined my mother in serving the homeless. Every stitch of available clothes was given away." Her youth was spent in Chicago, and then she came to New York City alone at age 18, where she found her first job as a journalist, writing for a socialist newspaper called The Masses, writing articles on child labor, evictions, strikes, all while leading a very bohemian lifestyle in Greenwich Village, where she kind of fell in with socialists, anarchists, playwrights, actors. This was a very rebellious period of her life. She had lovers, She had an abortion. She married and shortly divorced. She lived in Europe for a time. Back in New York City, she returned, and she was feeling untethered, lost, no direction. And she wrote, "During that time, I felt the spell of the long loneliness descend on me." With money received, $5,000, a lot of money back then, from the movie rights of a novel she had written, she bought a beach cottage on Staten Island. There she lived with her common-law husband, Foster, and conceived her daughter, Tamar Teresa. This time of her life was very joyful. Staten Island is where, in her words, she experienced the very love of nature and embraced Catholicism's mysteries. She converted to Catholicism, and both Tamar and she were baptized in Our Lady Help of Christians Church in Tottenville. This change and determination to be a Catholic, this conversion, was a way to bring order to her life and to her daughters. And it broke apart her relationship with Foster, who was an atheist and an anarchist and didn't believe in any of that. So for the next few years, she leaned heavily into her newfound faith, but still she was very Catholic, and before she was a radical rebel and a bohemian, and she was trying to find a way to fuse this together. So, searching for a way to fuse her radical philosophy with Christian tenets of mercy, she met Peter Morin, who was, in her book, she called him a French peasant, who introduced her to Catholic social teaching, which was very different than Catholic doctrine. In 1933, they founded the Catholic Worker Movement. Their philosophy focused on pacifism, voluntary poverty, the works of mercy, resulting in houses of hospitality and farming communities, as well as the Catholic Worker newspaper. She wrote, "I did not see anyone taking off his coat and giving it to the poor. I didn't see anyone having a banquet and calling in the lame, the halt, and the blind. I wanted, though I did not know it then, a synthesis. I did not want just the few to be kind to the poor. I wanted everyone to be kind. I wanted every home to be open to the lame, the halt, the blind, the way it had been after the San Francisco earthquake." Dorothy died in 1980 in Mary House, a Catholic worker house on the Lower East Side, and she is buried here on Staten Island in Resurrection Cemetery, just a few steps away from the water's edge that she so loved. So, Mary, I've brought some mosaics from my series, Dorothy Day Mosaics, Iconography of an Activist, that I'll share with you today with Mary's help. So, you can just sit with that, yeah. Perfect. Okay, in these mosaics, I've taken symbolic imagery associated with Dorothy Day and fused them with motifs that are part of the inherited vocabulary of mosaic design. I chose mosaics as a medium because of its association with the sacred. The process of making a mosaic is its own kind of meditation. The mosaics are composed of patterned shapes and quiet, undulating areas of tile. They explore Dorothy's duality of what is seen, her lifetime of radical actions, with what is unseen, her spiritual self. There is also the grit and earthiness of mosaic making. You use cement, tile, hammer, a chisel, a tree stump that you stick your chisel in to cut. So it's kind of physical, just as the preparing of food, the cutting of carrots and celery for soup. And akin to Dorothy's belief through words and actions that all humans matter, each tile is of equal value and necessity to a mosaic, no one more important than the other. So my first one, kind of the centerpiece of the series, is entitled Braid. And this design is very familiar, very common in mosaic design. You see it in floor patterns in ancient sites and sacred churches. So Dorothy is known for her crown of braided hair, and the braid, to me, is a trinity, and it weaves together, so it weaves together her spiritualism with her activism and her pacifism. So all three of these things, this fusion, occurs with the symbol of the braid. In terms of spiritualism, she was nourished by the literature of Dickens, Dostoevsky, and the Psalms of the Bible, and the church as a sacred space with its rituals, song, community, and collective prayer. In terms of activism, through her writings, the Catholic Worker paper, starting houses of hospitality, commune farms, union protests. So that's her activism piece of the braid. And in terms of pacifism, she was anti-war through World War II, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and in the 1950s, she led early sit-ins resisting nuclear fallout drills. Okay, so Mary, the next one, which is columns. So here we have, and so these mosaics are made with like a combination of materials. They're ceramic, they're marble, they're polished marble, unpolished marble, some stone. So I call this piece columns. And so Day began publishing the Catholic Worker newspaper on May Day, May 1st, 1933, right in the middle of the Great Depression. They were handed out that very day on Union Square. She writes, the first issue came out with articles about labor, strikes, unemployment, actual accounts, columns, and features. We would sell the paper, I decided, for a cent a copy, to make it so cheap that anyone could afford to buy it. So you can see, and in a lot of my artwork too, I'm very involved with columns as well, so it's kind of a generic, like a symbolic design of wording and lettering. And also the black and white is kind of this fusing of inherited mosaic design. Black and white is like a pre-Christian mosaic motif. Okay, the next one is protests. So once again, the black and white design, a border, common motifs in mosaic making. She writes, it was the suppression of the masses, which was the socialist newspaper. It was the suppression of the masses that I again went to Washington, this time with a group to picket the White House with the suffragists. So Dorothy was arrested with fellow women protesters. She was jailed, beaten severely, went on a hunger strike with a number of these women, and finally released through some kind of advocacy after, I believe, 20 days. Her final arrest, I believe she was arrested about 17 times through all of these kind of protests. Her final arrest was at age 70 at the United Farm Workers strike, along with the leaders Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez of California. And there's a famous picture of her. I think, I have a copy of The Long Loneliness here that I found in like a little library. So, and I have 3 copies. So anyone that wants to read The Long Loneliness, which I highly recommend if you want to learn about Dorothy, it's the best because there's a lot of writing about her. There's a lot of information on her. I recommend this. But here she is in the, she's surrounded by police officers, and she's got her sun hat on, and she's sitting there with her hands folded, very poised, unafraid, and knows she's going to be arrested, but she always stood her ground. Okay, next one. So that's the one next to braid, Mary. 3 chairs for Mary. They're pretty heavy and a little dusty. So some of these are littler. They're easier to transport, so I have more, but these are just a selection. So this is called Little House. And Mary, if you point that little tiny center, tiny little thing, there's a tiny little like Delft tile of a little tiny house. And she says, "It was my friend Peggy who persuaded me then to buy a little house on the beach of Staten Island where I could settle down to study and to write. The little house was furnished very simply with a driftwood stove in one corner. My writing table faced the window where I could look out at the water all day. Later in the evening, the wind rose again and whistled around the house, and the notice of the sea was loud." And you can see that big swirl of a wind or a wave. And I also think it's a metaphor for the long loneliness. There were times when she felt very tiny, very alone, and that's what kind of drew her, started to pull her. Once she came to Staten Island, she got really pulled into this desire to kind of change her life that led to her conversion. But that swirl of the sea kind of surrounding her is, I think, also a metaphor for the long loneliness. Okay, the next one. The next one is birth. So it's the black and white circular. Yeah, the little circle. So classic black and white, unpolished marble mosaic with a border. And so in birth, she wrote, "No human creature could receive or contain so vast a flood of love and joy as I often felt after the birth of my child. With this came the need to worship, to adore." So you can see she's being drawn and she's being pulled. She's kind of has this desire, but she's conflicted, this desire to change. Okay. The next one is the square one with this. And this is called meditation, and it's from it's kind of based on a floor pattern, which are very common in mosaics. And the reason we still know that some mosaics exist because there was a lot of floor mosaics, and with earthquake and war and passage of time, walls fall down on a mosaic, bury it, and preserve it. Right? So this is based on a floor mosaic. But she wrote, so there are these nine squares of this kind of receding, nesting squares. "My absorption," she writes, "was in the supernatural rather than the natural, the unseen rather than the seen." So she's being pulled in this, she's reading, she's loving nature, she's wanting to kind of worship post the birth of her daughter. She was so joyful that she had a baby. She didn't think she was able to bear a child. So she's kind of, but being pulled in, and it's the supernatural rather than the natural, the unseen rather than the seen, and this kind of internalness of prayer and thought. Okay? So the next one is the one that you have to hold, the piece. So I had a little accident in transport, which happens with mosaic tiles. But it's okay, because glue fixes everything. So, not everything, but in this case. So Mary's got her finger on a little piece, but these are like sea glass that was gathered on the shores of Staten Island, these 3 little insets. Can I see it for a second, Mary? Yeah, right. 3 little, in the center is I viewed as Mary, as Dorothy Day, kind of bending, and on one side is a man that she's holding with his back turned away from her, and on the other side are columns representing the Roman Catholic Church. So this piece is called Desires, but it could also be called Conflict. And she writes, "It was the great mass of the poor, the workers, who were the Catholics in this country, and this fact in itself drew me to the church." So the fusion is starting to come. I had become convinced that I would become a Catholic, yet I felt I was betraying the class to which I belonged, the workers, the poor of the world. So she's still kind of bouncing back and forth, and there's a conservatism to Catholicism that she kind of resisted in certain ways, but in other ways she became very devout. She writes, as a matter of fact, Foster left me quite a number of times that coming winter and summer, as he felt my increasing absorption in religion. Foster saw man in the light of reason and not in the life of faith, as I did. And that's that absorption for her in the supernatural. And then she wrote, I felt all along that when I took the irrevocable step, it would mean that Tamar and I would be alone, and I did not want to be alone. I did not want to give up human love when it was dearest and tenderest. And she had a common law marriage with this man. She was very much in love with him, thrilled that she'd had a baby. They had a life as a family on, in this beach cottage. He would fish and he would go and work in the city and come back, and she was very happy. But whenever she does something to the nth degree. So when she was a radical, she was radical. When she was a bohemian, she was bohemian. When she was a family woman, a mother, a wife, she did it 100%. But then she had this conversion and this pull and this draw, and she couldn't fight it. So their relationship ended, and she then was kind of searching. So the next tile mosaic. It's the big one. So this is called ladles, and it's made entirely with glass, but it is cemented. And if I had, if I were installing it in a space, it would be a giant frieze of ladles. So this is just, in effect, a detail. So she meets, as I said, she meets Peter Morin, and they start the Catholic Worker. It started with just soup lines. It started with the newspaper, and then in the newspaper they're saying we need to feed the poor, and then the poor showed up at the door, and then they said, okay, now we need to make soup. So she talks about how it's just this kind of organically unfolded, because she wasn't a top-down leader. She was into personalism, and everybody had their role, kind of like what happens here in the Unitarian Church, Everybody has a little piece of something to do. And so in 1933, she and Peter Morin start the Catholic Worker, which becomes a movement and grows from the newspaper to the soup lines, then to houses of hospitality that are housing people. And she writes about the soup lines. Soup lines could be up to 1,000 persons a day at the Catholic Workers' House of Hospitality on the Lower East Side. The destitute were the men and women who came to us in bread lines, and we could do little with them but give what we had of food and clothing. And she did more than little, but she kind of made things work through her kind of her leadership and her asking for donations, like Jim's parents' car, or persevering and just kind of getting through the day. It was kind of a day-by-day thing. And then we have our final piece, fishes. So I'm glad Robin didn't do this with her bad back. So here's fishes. It's a circular motif. If Mary, she could rotate it any way, and it kind of reads. And fishes, of course, is a symbol of Christianity in the early Christians. Sorry. So Day referred often to the Sermon on the Mount when she spoke about feeding the poor, and titled a later book, Loaves and Fishes. She writes, lines of people began to form saying, we need bread. We could not say, go be thou filled. If there were 6 small loaves and a few fishes, we had to divide them. So in closing, I'd like to say that Dorothy Day was a woman of unflinching strength, intelligence, and commitment. She lived by example. She was a reformer, a social organizer who created, that creator. She was created a movement to seek justice and to help the needy. Thank you. And thank you, Mary.
Please join us in singing hymn 1027, Cuando el Pobre, our closing hymn, in your teal hymnal. Please stand as you are able.
Okay, actually you'll find an insert where the words have been written out in English. We'll sing from the insert and continue to practice our Spanish the next time.
I invite you to join me in extinguishing our chalice. You can find the affirmation in our order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our closing words are from Louise Bourgeois. The color blue, that is my color. And the color blue means you have left the drab of drabness of day-to-day reality, to be transported into not a world of fantasy. It's not a world of fantasy, but a world of freedom, where you can say what you like and what you don't like. This has been expressed forever by the color blue, which is really sky blue.
Okay, find your insert. This is the one that has two songs on it. It says postlude on the right. And you're going to postlude with us. Everyone, please stand. You'll recognize this hymn. We changed the words a little bit for the occasion. And so ends our service. Please join us in the parish hall for hospitality. And before you leave, just a few announcements. Most of you know our Spiritual Growth Circle meets the second and fourth Sundays of the month after hospitality at 1 p.m. in the library. However, next Sunday, which would be the third, or I guess the fourth Sunday, it would normally be here. We're going to go on a field trip with the Spiritual Growth Circle because Dorothy Day's granddaughter, Martha Hennessy, is going to be speaking at the Noble Museum in Snug Harbor. So we'll gather here at 1 o'clock, as we normally do, and then walk to the Noble Museum to hear her speak. And she will be speaking on her life and the works of mercy, and we're really looking forward to that and being able to discuss that together in terms of our own spiritual growth. So, hoping you can join us.